Hello, and thank you for inviting me to join you at the Korea Economic Daily Forum. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to speak with so many people in Korea, especially at this important time in your country's history, as we see steps being taken of reconciliation between the peoples of North and South Korea, and a real new step forward of hope that North Korea's nuclear program might be finally and fully dismantled, paving the way for a reconciliation of the North not only with South Korea, but with other countries in the region and across the world. What has been happening in Korea politically, and what has been happening in your country economically, are metaphors for the kinds of changes going on all across the world today. We live in a truly interdependent world. We're interdependent not simply economically, where $3 trillion US crosses national borders every day in various kinds of transactions, but we're interdependent in other ways as well. We find out what each other are doing on the news. We communicate with people across the globe on the internet. We have options we never had before to influence events half a world away by our private giving because of the internet. And we are bound together by common culture and by common fears like climate change and the prospects of terror. If you look at this modern world with all of the good things going on, which has brought so much prosperity to South Korea and a new day of hope in your relationships with the North, we see that for all the good things, there are three huge challenges. The modern world, for all its opportunities, is unequal, persistently so, in economics, education, and healthcare. Half the world's people live on less than $2 a day, 1 billion on less than $1 a day. 1 billion people go to bed hungry every night. 1 billion people have no access to clean water. 2.5 billion have no access to sanitation. Even within the rich countries, inequality is often growing. And in healthcare and education, the situation is much the same. 130 million children in the world never go to school at all. You know what a role having a well-educated citizenry has played in South Korea's economic revival. 130 million children don't go to school. Tens of millions more go to school but don't have trained teachers or good learning materials. In healthcare, 1 in 4 of all deaths this year on Earth from all causes will be from AIDS, TB, malaria, and infections due to dirty water, cholera, dysentery, diarrhea. 10 million children will die of completely preventable childhood diseases. So we have a world that, for all of its prosperity, is unequal. Secondly, it is unstable because of climate change and the depletion of resources and the looming population explosion. If the world warms for the next 50 years at the rate of the last 10, we will lose whole coastal cities. Tens of millions of people will have to be relocated away from the oceans. Agricultural production patterns will be disrupted all across the globe. This will have calamitous consequences and lead to more conflict in many places. Even before that happens, the loss of trees and topsoil and plant and animal species at the most rapid rate in 150,000 years, all these things may contribute to scarcity in the world, which will make it difficult to maintain stability and peace. And finally, all these problems will be compounded if, as projected, the world's population grows from its current level of 6.5 billion to 9 billion in just 43 years by 2050. Think of it. As nearly as we can determine, our species, Homo sapiens, first rose up on the African savanna approximately 150,000 years ago. All the differences we see among people in our skin color, the shape of our faces, the size of our bodies, the color of our hair, all these things have developed in adjustments to environment over just 150,000 years. It took us that long to grow from 1 to 6.5 billion people. Now, in just 43 years, we're supposed to go from 6.5 to 9 billion people on Earth. This will increase the pressures of climate change. It will increase the pressures on depleting resources. And most of these people are going to be born in countries not now able to support the people who live there. So there will be much more immigration and much more conflict over it. This inequality challenge and the instability challenge are further aggravated by the third big problem of the modern world, and that is the identity challenge. We see it most clearly now in terrorism by Islamic fundamentalists and by others. The conflicts on the island of Sri Lanka between the Hindu Tamil minority and the Sinhalese Buddhist majority. We see it in all the racial, religious, and ethnic conflicts of the world. We have to find a way to deal with the fact that our identities are being constantly challenged as we're thrown into contact day in and day out in our daily lives and over the media, in our political lives. We're constantly thrown into contact with people who are radically different from us. We have to find a way to make common cause with them, to understand them, to appreciate our differences, but to believe that our common humanity matters more. I believe the 21st century can be the most peaceful, prosperous, interesting time in all of human history, an enormously important time for all the peoples of Asia, if we can deal with these three challenges of inequality, instability, and identity. In order to do that, we will have to do a number of things. We do need a security system, one that helps to prevent terrorist attacks and the most grievous consequences of our interdependence. For example, some terrorist group getting a hold of a small nuclear weapon. But security will never be enough because we cannot possibly kill, jail, or occupy all of our adversaries. Therefore, in addition to security, we need diplomacy, the kind of diplomacy that produced the breakthrough with North Korea, the kind of diplomacy that enabled your president to visit the North and to begin the reconciliation project in earnest. And we need to build a world with more partners and fewer enemies. We need to take on the problems of inequality and instability and identity. The wealthy countries of the world have a big responsibility here. We know how to put the poorest children of the world in school. We know what it costs to fight AIDS, TB, malaria, to build good health systems in poor countries. And we know how to help people in poor countries work their way out of poverty. All these things are not very expensive. Certainly not as expensive as going to war and maintaining a big national defense. In the United States, for example, we spend about $450 billion a year on our regular defense budget, $120 billion on the war in Iraq, and quite a lot in Afghanistan and in other areas. Now, for all that money, we are trying to keep bad things from happening and trying to influence the outcome of events for a few million people in the Middle East. For about $40 billion, much, much less than we spend just in Iraq, we could play our share of the United Nations Millennium Development Goals to reduce poverty, increase education, fight all the health problems of the world. And we would be improving the lives of more than 2 billion people. The same thing holds true for any other well-off country, including South Korea. We have got to build a world with more partners and fewer adversaries. The next thing we have to do is to make sure we're doing everything we can to continue to growing stronger at home and fighting these problems of identity, of instability, of inequality. We have got to prove that we can, in developing countries and developed countries alike, defeat the threat of climate change without shrinking economic growth. I do not believe that it would cause the Korean economy, the Chinese economy, the Japanese economy, or the American economy to lose jobs and lose ground if we were to reduce our carbon emissions. In fact, if we do it in the right way, I believe it will create a vast new range of new jobs for all of our people. It will reduce inequality, increase wealth, and increase growth. if we go to clean energy, if we go to efficient energy. You don't really have to take my word for it. If you look at a country like Denmark or a country like the United Kingdom, unlike the United States, these countries have not had an increase in income inequality. They have more jobs and their wages are rising and inequality is going down because they've made a commitment to a clean, efficient, independent energy future. Every country that does this, that thinks about what its energy options are and uses energy in the most efficient way, is going to be rewarded economically. In the United States recently, Goldman Sachs had a study which indicated that if the U.S., Canada, India, and Russia alone were to simply achieve the energy efficiency levels of Japan, with no new clean energy, nothing from solar, nothing from wind, nothing from geothermal, nothing from the tides, just efficiency, we could reduce global greenhouse gas emissions by 20%. And think of all the jobs it would create investing in that kind of efficiency, retrofitting all the buildings, the homes, the offices, the apartment buildings, the manufacturing facilities, changing all the lighting, doing all the things that we could do that would not only reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but lower our energy costs and increase jobs and growth in our respective countries. I think that is terribly important. The other thing we have to do is to find a way to manage our own diversity. I have been really impressed with this recent outreach to the north by South Korea, and with what it says about the ability of people with common roots but different cultures to reconcile. In addition to the traditional faiths of the Korean people, South Korea is home to the largest Christian evangelical churches in the world. And yet, you see the common humanity with your brothers and sisters in the North. You reach out to them. You work toward new unity with them. You work toward walking away from the prospect of war and conflict and more killing. This is the sort of thing we're going to have to do all over the world. Yes, we should cling to our religious faiths and our national identities, and we should be proud of our heritage. But we have to find a way to make common cause. These, then, are the things that I think have to be done for us to make the most of the 21st century. Home improvement on the economy, on social problems, on creating a new energy future. Continuous working on reconciliation, and working on building a world with more partners and fewer enemies. Does the government have to do a lot of this work? Of course. A lot of these things have to be done by government and can only be done by government. But businesses can make a difference, and citizens can make a difference. If you just think about your own situation, business investment in the new zone near the border in North Korea can make a huge difference in helping convince the North Koreans they should open up and modernize not only their economy, but their society. And it can be driven by private market economics. Businesses can make different decisions about energy use, which can help to facilitate a nation and the world's transition toward a more carbon-free future and away from climate change. And individual citizens working in groups can build a vigorous civil society, which can help bridge the gaps of difference between people in the country and all over the world. In the United States, when I left office, there were about 500,000 non-governmental organizations doing this kind of work. In just this decade, the number has doubled. Not to replace what government should do, not to replace what the private sector should do, but to build a vibrant civil society that can be partners. I'll just give you some examples from my own experience. I set up a foundation when I left the White House to work on getting the cheapest AIDS drugs in the world to poor countries in Africa, the Caribbean, Latin America, and Asia. We have healthcare projects in 25 countries. We sell AIDS medicine in 71 countries at the lowest cost in the world. For about 15% of what it costs the American government to do so, we treat almost as many people. This is civil society at its best. We work in cooperation with our government and with all the governments in which the countries where we operate are functioning. We do this everywhere. We're now working with more than a dozen cities in 5 continents to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions by making their buildings more efficient. We are working on healthcare issues in the 2 African countries to try to build a rural healthcare model that every poor country in the world can copy. We're trying to double the per capita income in 2 of those countries. And we're about to start working wherever mining occurs in Asia, Africa, and Latin America to try to help poor mining communities diversify their incomes, build new businesses, create new jobs, and build a better future. In every case, we're working with the private sector and with the government, but it's the forces of civil society that are driving this change. When people in South Korea demonstrate in the street for freedom, they're reflecting the forces of civil society. Today, those forces are being organized to try to achieve concrete political, economic, and social objectives. Not to replace government, not to replace the private sector, but to create a whole society for the 21st century global world that has all 3 in ample supply. Again, let me say how much I am impressed with the progress that has been made in South Korea and the progress that has been made in dealing with the North. How strongly I support your country, its economy, our trade and political relationship, and your efforts to build a more united future for the Korean Peninsula and for North Asia. It is symbolic of what the whole world has to do, recognizing that there are many differences among all the peoples of the earth. They make our lives much more interesting because we know about each other now. But in the end, our common humanity has to matter more. It's the only way we'll defeat terror, the only way we can avoid a nuclear calamity, the only way we will save the earth from climate change so that our grandchildren will have even brighter futures than we did, the only way we can learn to cope with the challenges of our societies in terms of inequality in income, education, and health care. On balance, I'm very optimistic about this time and the future. I think for all of our problems, it is not likely that the 21st century will claim as many innocent lives as the 20th century did. We can't forget the wars in Korea and Vietnam, the Chinese Cultural Revolution, World War I, World War II, the Holocaust, the purges in the former Soviet Union, all the tribal wars in Africa, and so many more things that claimed well over 100 million innocent lives. The 21st century should be a time of scientific advance, of lengthening lifespans, of more universally held education and prosperity. But in order to do it, we have to have a future where we come together, not drift apart. And that requires domestic success and building a world with more partners and fewer adversaries. It can be done, but we all have to do it together. Thank you very much.